Okay, here we go. Moving along with species ecology. We will talk today about, we'll continue our defining of ecology. We will start to look at the population and species levels, at organismal distribution and abundance, a fundamental part of ecology. We'll look at individual dispersion within populations on landscapes and in seascapes. We'll look at social group formation, the formation of flocks, and the pros and cons of flocking or gregariousness. And then we'll finish, I hope we'll get to these things today, some other ways to think broadly about organisms and the trade-offs that organisms experience as they go about their business. Remember, we had given a couple of early definitions of ecology, Darwin's, rather Haeckel's after Darwin. And maybe that's the only one I gave you so far. Well, here's one from the early 20th century. One of the first professional ecologists. Ecology was Charles Elton. Ecology didn't really begin as a science, as a self-aware science, a science that recognized that it was a distinct field, that had positions in university departments named for it. You know, a university might have a position for a animal ecologist. And Charles Elton was among this first generation of professional ecologists. He was an animal ecologist, a great field biologist. And here he is getting on his bike with a bunch of traps to go catch rodents, part of his fieldwork in the UK. And he gave another definition to ecology that is also extremely broad. He said ecology is a new name for a very old subject. It simply means scientific natural history. So we looked at what natural history is, and he basically said it's just natural history, but made scientific. And by that he meant more quantitative, more methodological, more methodologically aware, more experimental in some cases. And Elton was one of the first to really study in detail food webs, the exchange of mass and energy in ecological systems and communities. And he worked in the Arctic, among other places, and he built these food webs based on his results in the Arctic. And he says here in the caption, to follow this, start with marine animals, this little box here, and follow the arrows. So he intended this as a flow diagram to show the connections among the community members in terms of the exchange of mass and energy. From the marine animal category here, and that must be a big category, you have an arrow to all of these birds, kittiwakes, guillemots, little auks, puffins, and so forth. An arrow down to the seals here, an arrow from the seals leads to polar bears. You have sort of a broken arrow here leading to decaying matter. Presumably when everything dies, it goes into this category of decaying matter and gets recycled through the system. Bacteria here, mineral salts, nitrogen, even a chemical element on here. But this is one of the first depictions of a complex food web diagrammer, interaction web. And we'll look at more of those, and you'll learn to read those and enjoy those. So definitions became more narrow, more specific and more narrow as the century went on. And a couple of definitions really held for the latter part of the 20th century. An Australian well-known in ecology defined ecology as the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms. It seems very narrow. Just the study of the distribution and abundance of organisms. It seems to leave out a lot about what ecologists do. So when we define our terms, if we're trying to be general, we need to be careful about forming our definitions within our narrow focus of interest. And that was seen to be somewhat inadequate, although it was useful for many people. And it was improved upon, perhaps, about 10 years later, with a definition that was really common in textbooks. For example, when I was in college, a common definition could be seen like this, of Charles Krebs's. And all he really adds is that it's the scientific study of the interactions that determine the distribution and abundance of organisms. So he adds that phrase, and ecologists lived with that as a definition for 20 or 30 years. And people played with it, and people continue to play with it. I give you these to think about for yourself, to think about what ecology is. Now this one is much more complex, but it's more true to the breadth of ecology. This is from the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies, a nice research institute and think tank back in New York, well known for its ecological research. And they provide a definition that I modified slightly. Theirs was even longer than this. So here's a definition I'm comfortable with because it does capture the breadth of the field, I think. The scientific study of the processes that influence the distribution and abundance of organisms, the interactions among organisms, and the relationship between organisms and the abiotic environment. I'm sure there's an ecologist out there that would be unhappy with this, and the debate should continue. But distribution and abundance are indeed fundamental parts of a species' natural history and what ecologists study, distribution and abundance. That's a cattle egret, the Volcus ibis. It's a bird commonly seen in African savanna-type systems. And it's an old world bird. It's a bird from Africa and Asia that you can see following big mammals around the landscape like this, running behind the elephants, walking on the backs of the wildebeest, doing its thing. It's a commensal with these other organisms. It's collecting the dead grasshoppers and locusts and things that the elephant steps on and is not interested in eating itself. Maybe there's a lizard that gets maimed in the process of these big mammals walking and it's there to pick them up. Maybe it pulls some parasites off the skin of these other organisms and actually assists the organism in that sense, and you might consider it a mutualist in that regard. But this is a bird that was basically distributed in the old world, in Africa and Asia, until the early 30s, when a small flock of them blew over the Atlantic and landed in South America. An extraordinary case of a long-distance dispersal event, natural, apparently in a storm where somehow they got separated from their original African population, and they made it to South America. And from there, they've expanded all the way into North America and almost down to Tierra del Fuego. So you can see Volcus ibis across the New World today. And in that sense, think about the distribution of this species. It changed radically as a result of one major dispersal event. And the amount of area of land that it occupies now is very different from what it occupied just before 1937. That's its distribution, or its range. Kangaroos, the red kangaroo in particular, this illustration shows nicely distribution and abundance in one diagram. You can see that the limits of the range of the red kangaroo are something like this. You know that the Australian interior is relatively dry and relatively hot. And so this is an animal that seems to be inhabiting these arid regions. It's distributed in that manner. Its abundance, well, it reaches its highest abundance in some of the hottest and driest areas. There are other kangaroos around. This one has this distribution and abundance. What influences that distribution and abundance? So there you have an animal that is physiologically adapted, it seems, to life in these hot climates. It has these blood vessels, a network of blood vessels very close to the skin, and a couple of behavioral mechanisms for dealing with the heat, which is to seek shade and to lick its arms and to cool itself through evaporative means through those behaviors. So it is dealing with the heat in these particular ways. Think about other kangaroos that might or might not have those traits. They can help explain some morphological traits, behavioral traits, can help explain where this animal lives and why it is successful, where it is successful. So a population is just the individuals of a particular species in a particular area. We usually think of a population as having the capacity to interbreed, to breed together. Whether they do or not, they have the potential to breed, and we consider that a population in an area. As we'll see, populations are not distributed uniformly across landscapes. They're not all in one place. They're distributed in different ways. The individuals within populations are dispersed in different ways across an area or in a volume. But the size of the population is a fundamental characteristic of that population. And we symbolize the number of individuals in the population with an N, capital N. And we'll be exploring that over the next couple of lectures, what influences big N population size. And various factors we'll see do influence population size. And we'll get into them. But in the field, if you want to estimate abundance, numbers of individuals, either just as a raw value, there are 10. Or as a density, well, there are 10 per 100 square meters. Or in a volume of water, there are 10 per certain volume of water. You can do that in these different ways depending on the habitat that you're working in and what organisms you're dealing with. You have different techniques for measuring abundance depending on circumstances. If you can, you just go count them. You can do this with the eucalypts outside in the grove here outside. They stay still long enough that you can count them. You can put a little tag on them if you must, if you can't remember if you had counted them or not, and you can get a pretty accurate count. You can count them all because they stay still and they're big. You could count even a herd of orcs like this. This was an endangered group of antelope in southern Sudan, and they flew a plane over. This was one of the few groups. They could count them. They fly over. They know there are none other around. It's an open area with mostly grassland. Count them up. You can do it. You can do it with elephants. Although you find, even with something like an elephant, how hard it is to actually track them and actually get good numbers of individuals in the group. They're so shifty. If you're on the ground with the elephants, you'll be surprised at how they disappear and reappear. And I'm not sure if that's the same one. And it can be really tricky business. So even with big animals like this, you often need different means of estimating abundance. And ecologists use a whole array of sampling strategies to estimate abundance, not just for animals, but for plants and on coral reefs and in other systems. And quadrats may be used, or transects, line transects may be used. And I'll give you a couple of simple ways to think about these. You may be introduced to them in some of the lab work that you do, particularly if you're in the field section of this course. But quadrat can be used it's like taking a poll, right? You look at a small area or volume of the habitat, and you compute with some accuracy and precision how many individuals of a particular kind are in that quadrat, or even within subsections of that quadrat. And then you extrapolate from that area or volume to a larger area or volume to get a more global estimate of population numbers. But you subsample by necessity, because there are just too many to count. There are too many grass species to count in this field. So count them here and extrapolate to the whole field. And you do something similar with a line transect. There are lots of different methods for this, but think of it just in terms of laying down a line, and on the transect you lay down, if it's on a coral reef, you might be interested in the number of a particular type of coral that's there. Well, how many times does that line actually contact one of these corals that you're interested in? Or maybe you'll expand the transect to form a sort of band. Well, on a half meter on either side of the transect, how many are there of this particular kind of creature that you're interested in? And then that's effectively an area. You've made a band, that's an area. Use that area to extrapolate and calculate how many organisms of interest there are in a larger area. Sometimes you can't even count the organisms themselves, and you rely on indirect methods, where you're not actually looking at the organisms themselves, but their sign, or their trackways in the case of vertebrates like this. There are coyotes here, there are bobcats, a skunk walks by, and if you can tell what their different feet look like, you can estimate how many there are by a detailed study. What is that? What do you think that is? Sorry? It's a chimney. It's a crayfish's chimney, of course. A crayfish in a habitat like this will typically make one chimney per crayfish. There'll be a burrow down here of a couple of meters, and when they're excavating, they pile up their mud vertically like that. That way they never have to be exposed at all. They can just reach up, put a pellet up, and they don't have to expose their body. That's maybe one reason. Maybe it oxygenates their burrows, which do tend to be low in oxygen. For whatever reason they do it, there tends to be one per crayfish. So you can just walk around and count chimneys and get a pretty accurate estimate of how many individual crayfish there are in the system. Or if you get good at identifying poo, that's a very common activity for mammalogists to study scat, because it's easier to find than the animals themselves, which may be very secretive. You can even study other species that are closely related in numbers to the species of interest. In this study from, I believe it was Siberia, they were interested in peregrines from that area. This vast area where peregrine falcons are coming back after having been lost for much of the area as a result of pesticides. They're coming back, and these people are interested in how many there are. Well, this is a bird that flies fast, it flies high, it flies great distances, and can be really hard to track. Peregrine falcons have made a comeback in this country too. You can find them in the Bay Area. Small bird, really spectacular with its fast dives, really beautiful bird. Coming back in some city areas as good pigeon hunters. They're favored in cities as hunting pigeons. Well, they'll also hunt a fox. And so when you have peregrines, you tend not to have foxes, these Arctic foxes around. And when you don't have Arctic foxes around, the red-breasted geese are happy and make their nests. So these geese tend to form a really tight association with the peregrines, in fact. You don't tend to have geese when you don't have peregrines, because the foxes are present, which eat the geese. That's a very close nesting association between these two birds. It's hard to count these, but it's pretty easy to count these, because they're not nearly as mobile. So what these guys did is they compared two techniques to ground truth their estimations of abundance based on nesting association, and found they could, with pretty good accuracy, estimate abundance and density of peregrines based on the nesting association with red-breasted geese, another indirect method. This one is commonly used by animal ecologists. It's mark recapture techniques, and it can be fun to do in the field. You can do it with a whole variety of organisms. They could be grasshoppers, they could be crabs, they could be fish, they could be elephants. The idea is you have a population of individuals like this that you sample, and you can't sample them all, so you sample a group of them. You grab a group of them, that comprises your first sample, and you put a mark on them of some kind. You may put a little nail polish on them if it's a snail shell, or you may put a tag through their ear if it's a big mammal. You mark them in some way that you can identify them later. You might not even have to physically mark them. If this is a group of dolphins and something about their fin is uniquely identifiable, individual to individual, you could have dolphins of this number and be able to identify everyone based on the unique markings they have. Then you could just do it visually that way, if you can. But more classically, you mark them. You put a tag on them. That's your first sample. And then you let those organisms back into their original population to mix freely in that population. And after you've given them enough time to mix freely back into the population, you sample the population again. Not necessarily in the same spot. You sample it again. And you determine how many of that second sample have the tags that were made on the first sample. And what do you know? The number of individuals marked in that second sample relative to the number of individuals in the sample as a whole is a reflection of the number of individuals that were marked in the first place relative to the total population size. So the number of individuals marked and found in the second sample relative to the total number of individuals captured in the second sample, x over n, is proportional to the number of individuals that were originally marked relative to the total population size. So it's a simple formula, x over n equals m over n. And solving for n there, you can compute and estimate total population size just on the basis of those three variables. It's really convenient. And you can do it here from the slide if you want, and you'll find that you get a pretty accurate estimate based on this example of total population size. So just remember that little formula and the strategy, and you'll be able to do this at home with your cockroaches or whatever you have available. Those are techniques around abundance estimation. Let's think about distribution and ranges, tracking movement. One commonly used methodology these days is PIT tags, passive integrated transponders. Some sort of device, usually not battery powered, so that it can last a long time, but it has a chip in it, so that when it's scanned, it can send information back. And pets are getting PIT tags put in them commonly these days, so that if a pet is lost, it can be scanned and its origin can be determined. Well, field biologists are using it a lot too. You can insert these things under the skin of frogs, in the armpits of turtles, and migrating fish. They're very handy. You can release a bunch of salmon or some fish of interest, put PIT tags in them, and some years later, when they come back to spawn, you can catch a sample of them and check their tags and determine where they came from, how long they have been away, and a whole bunch of information that's stored in the chip. You can do radio collaring in the classic sense. Put a collar around the animal and follow it. You can do that on a pygmy bunny. You can do it on a aardvark, which I think would be crazy fun to put it on an aardvark. Follow that around. Meerkats. What's that? Tasmanian devil. Put it on a mouse. And these are still tried and true. You can still do this. Walk around with your antenna and monitor the movements of the organism. All together, good time. Camera traps are becoming really common. For animals that are real secretive at night, that you may, a rare carnivoran like this, you may not be able to trap them, you may not be allowed to trap them and put a collar on them. That's a risk for the organism. There's a risk entailed, a survival risk when you do that. So camera traps, trapping these animals in film with a hidden camera. I'm doing some of this in the park here. I didn't have time to get my pictures to show you some of those highlight pictures, so I grabbed a few off the web. But I get pictures in the park of gray foxes, bobcats, coyotes, no mountain lions on my cameras yet, but I'm still waiting for that. Skunks, raccoons, deer, all the rest. It's incredibly fun. It's a bit voyeuristic, but it's really fun to be watching who's doing what at night out there in the woods. This one, there's some kind of camera trap contest these days, and this one won an award. It was a series of where this jackal was harassing this big male lion at a water hole. It was a great series of the jackal really standing up for itself. Or an ocelot like this, a cat in the jungles of Central America. You can estimate movement patterns, abundance patterns from algorithms based on camera trap data. It's a fun new way to approach the study of secretive organisms. When you estimate abundance, you need to be sensitive to how individuals within a population are dispersed. Individuals randomly dispersed in an area are convenient to subsample because of that pattern. And I'll let you think about this as we go a little bit. But random dispersal of individuals in a population is actually relatively rare. It's relatively rarely seen in natural populations. We speak of a uniform distribution when the organisms are more or less evenly spaced across space. Or a clumped or patchy distribution when they form these units, these separate units. Which one do you think is most common in natural circumstances for a population? Most organisms tend to be clumped, patchily distributed. So if you go walking with a naturalist in the hills, say to look for birds, or even a botanist looking at plants, you'll be walking along and all of a sudden they'll see one, and if you're walking quickly, they might not even stop to look at that bird or that plant. They'll look just ahead on either side because they know if they've seen one, there might be another. Built in is our recognition that organisms are patchily distributed. You're walking along and you're looking for poison oak. All of a sudden you see some poison oak. Well, look here also, because there's probably going to be some. Organisms very commonly are dispersed like that, and that can relate to the conditions that they're growing in. The physical conditions that help to determine the distribution of an organism are themselves patchily arrayed, the abiotic conditions, or the resources that the organisms require for their survival and continuity. Those might be patchily distributed. So some of this reflects how organisms are mapping on to the conditions within which they live and the resources that they require. Random dispersal, an example is here from dandelions, right? These things are dispersed by the wind. The wind blows at some point, the thing rattles, and these things blow off, and if